What on earth does it take to thrive? Come together while the waters rise. There's a stirring deep inside. Deep inside. We come together to stand up for our lives. What on earth does it take to thrive? There's a stirring deep inside. Deep inside. We come together to stand up for our lives. We all have what it takes to thrive. Come together while the waters rise. There's a stirring deep inside. We come together to stand up for our lives. We all have what it takes to thrive. We come together while the waters rise. And there's a stirring deep inside. Come together to stand up for our lives. We all have what it takes to thrive. We all have what it takes to thrive. We all have what it takes to thrive.
Welcome back, freedom lovers. You are in the Freedom Portal, and I'm your host, Foster Gamble. You know, in this gathering, we go deep down the rabbit holes so that we can see the light at the other end of the tunnel, and we can actually create the solutions to get us out and create a thriving world. And today is one of the most important shows I think that we can do in order to accomplish exactly that. Because I was an anti-nuclear activist for a long time back in the 70s till we got a lot of the plants shut down and stopped and so forth. But for me, the next most important issue on the planet has been the geoengineering, because second only to the threat of nuclear holocaust, the intentional and massive dispersal of toxic substances into our global atmosphere is probably the most dangerous activity on Earth, because it's everywhere. You don't have a choice really whether you're going to breathe it or not. So we have a treat today because Elana Freeland is with us. And she is one of the most well-researched and effective voices informing humanity of this vast and unnecessary secret agenda. We're going to explore the evidence for who is doing this, how they're doing it, what they're doing, and why. All of that to empower the most important conversation of what can we do to stop it. But before we bring her on, Leandro, please come on, say hello.
How's it going, guys? Happy Freedom Portal Saturday. Good to be back here with you all as always. I'm super excited about this episode because I mean, the topic of chemtrails is just, it's a conspiracy classic, you know, so a real conspiracy staple, but admittedly, I don't have a very deep understanding of it. So I'm glad we have one of the most prominent thinkers exposing this agenda here with us today that can help take our understanding to the stratosphere. So I'm excited about it.
I like that. Take our understanding to the stratosphere. So how are the skies today when you were out there? Did you take a look?
Oh, the skies were beautiful over here in Austin, Texas. They're beautiful so far. No chemtrails in our area, thankfully, today. So
all right, great. I'll bring you back on in just a second to talk about the format of what today's show is going to be. First of all, I'd like to bring Drew Freeman on for a moment. Welcome back, Drew.
Great to be here.
And actually, you had mentioned when we were getting ready for the show that when you were up early going to the gym, you saw pretty frightful skies over Santa Cruz. You want to describe that?
Right. As you know, most commercial air traffic is during the day. And so this was at 4:45 a.m. I looked up and the sky was bright enough where I could see the chemtrails. There was just a pattern exactly like what you're seeing on Foster's screen above me. So there was just a lot of air traffic during the night leaving trails.
Well, we're working on it. So while we've got you, could you remind our audience about the location of the document where we've gathered our most trusted sources, both from Thrive and from our network, our most trusted media sources, because people are always asking, well, where can I get some news that I can actually trust?
Absolutely. So for those of you who are just joining us for the first time on this topic, over the last few weeks, we've put together a treasure trove of trusted news sources in terms of links, and they're all categorized by different sector. And what we've done is we've put that up in the Freedom Portal as a freely accessible document. And we're going to go ahead and drop the link to that in chat right now. So go ahead and go there. You'll be able to download the document. And use that as your own resource. Really think this is something unique on the internet right now in terms of really great trusted alternate news sources.
Well, thank you for that. And thanks for all your work getting it together. I've been sharing the link like crazy with my friends already. Okay, thank you. So Leandro, would you come back on and just describe what the format of today's show is going to be?
Yeah, so today we're continuing our new format of streaming publicly on Rumble, Odyssey, Twitter, and on YouTube. And so we'll be streaming for the first 30 minutes or so. of the show, and that'll all be publicly available. We're dropping links in the chat where you guys can share that with your friends or family that might be interested in being with us for the first 30 minutes. And then after that, of course, everybody will have the ability to be able to subscribe to the Freedom Portal to actually join our community with the 7-day trial, of course, to join our community and rejoin us here in the show. And we'll cover how exactly to do that transition before we transition. So,
okay, great. Thanks, Leandro.
Yep.
All right. So, Elana, why don't you bring your camera and mic on? Come on, say hello, and then I'll introduce you to the folks.
Am I there?
Yes, welcome. So great to see you.
Yes, thanks so much, Foster, for inviting me.
I've been a fan of Elana's for many years. It's been, it was a thrill for me to meet her in person when she came to Santa Cruz recently, just a couple of months ago. And then I got a chance to invite her on the show, and she was generous enough to spend some of her Saturdays sharing her wisdom with us. So let me tell you a little bit about this amazing lady. Elana is what I call a sense maker. She's, there's a lot of people who go really deep into one little topic or another, and that's really valuable. But then we need some comprehensivists, people who connect those dots and actually reveal the patterns of meaning that they show. And Elana is one of the major ones of those on the planet right now. In terms of background, Elana met an independent scientist, another real hero of mine named Clifford Carnicom, who in 2006 was still deeply engaged in collecting and measuring what had been falling from chemical jet trails over northern New Mexico since the mid-1990s. Under Clifford's microscope, she wrote, she watched the Morgellons pathogen suck the iron out of her own red blood cells when they were doing some testing of her blood in the lab. And we'll get her to talk about that a little bit later on. Elana is a ghostwriter. She's a writer. She's a lecturer, a storyteller, and a teacher who researches and writes on deep state issues, including the stories of survivors of MK Ultra, ritual abuse, and invasive electromagnetic weapons. She's living, and I believe she's talking to us today from Olympia, Washington.
That's right. That's where I am, up here where I call it the cauldron. This is where they mix the weather that they take east.
Wow. Well, we will get into that. And Elana is the author of 3 absolutely astounding books that we will get into, but I want to get into them one at a time because they're so rich that I want to do them by topic. And I want to go into each topic sequentially with Elana. Before I do that, I just want to ask you a general personal question. Elana, there's a lot more pleasant and safe things that you could be doing and researching and talking about than this right now. So why are you doing this?
I have to say that it's been some sort of mission. I assume it has something to do with all the research I did for my Sub Rosa America, a Deep State History series, which is in a fictional format, but is far from fiction. It's mostly history of the United States and what's happened to it since John Kennedy's assassination in Dallas. When I was researching for those books, I had 2 files, one on chemtrails, which I kept hearing about on the conspiracy stream, and I had one on HAARP, the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Project up in Gakona, Alaska. So I already had 2 files, but I was so ignorant back then that I didn't even know they had anything to do with each other. That's where I started when I wrote that first book. And so I didn't know it would be 13 years that I would be involved. I do feel I've written my last book on geoengineering because I have pretty much topped out what I can put together. And I brought it all the way from what's dumped from the skies for us to breathe to synthetic biology. I feel like now it's time for others to step forward and write more in detail.
Okay. Fantastic. Okay, I'm going to share my screen for a moment as we dive into this first topic of geoengineering and chemtrails in particular. So here's the amazing gentleman that I was referring to before, Clifford Carnicom. Actually had this really funny incident with him that Kimberly and I were recalling this morning when we did a screening in New Mexico, in Santa Fe, of Thrive 1 after it came out. We did the screening, we did a little Q&A afterward, and then a bunch of people were coming up toward the stage. And I recognized Clifford because he had already been a hero of mine for years. And so I just couldn't resist. I got down on my knees and I like just kind of bowed to him. And he just totally cracked up because it turned out he was a Thrive fan, didn't even realize how much I had been influenced by him. He's incredibly humble and just really diligent researcher. And you can look at his stuff at the Carnicom Institute.org. And if Sandra, if you would put that link in the chat, I would appreciate that. In our last show, when I did a 7 levels deep on environment, we did a poll and I said to our own network, do you believe chemtrails are different than contrails and are a serious concern? Well, we have a very sophisticated network of subscribers. So it skews a poll. You can see it was 95% of the people thought, yes, chemtrails are different than contrails and they're a very serious concern. It's a particular concern to me. I took this personally for a long time. My understanding is more generalized now, but here's a very small selection of pictures and a video from my own house. This is the sky over our garage. This is over our house. This is over Kimberly's garden. So unfortunately, more often than not, we're looking, this is the view out my office window. And unfortunately, this is what I look out at a lot of times. It's hard to actually go out and breathe deeply while you're looking at this type of stuff. Here's one that I took from Lake Tahoe. And here's a quick video at our home. This was taken just about 3 or 4 days ago. And if you're thinking to yourself, well, you know, these could be just left by some sort of a commercial airliner. Well, my question would be to you, who left this next one that I'll show you after this? Apparently, the commercial airliner made a mistake direction they were going and came back or something. Anyway, so I'll stop sharing and come back. And I really want to dive into the whole chemtrail topic with you, Elana. And this is the point at which I want to show this book, Chemtrails, HAARP, and the Full Spectrum Dominance of Planet Earth. This was Elana's first book on this topic. So I'm just going to invite you to, maybe for the next 15 minutes or so, just share whatever you want to familiarize people with this topic, because these clips will go out to the general public as well as our subscribers. And I know, because I've been to your slideshows, I know you've got some illustrations. If you want to at some point use that to illustrate it, just do what you want to as succinctly as you can. Give an overview of this topic from your perspective.
Great idea to use a bit of the of my slideshow so that people can see what it's coming from. Okay, so let's just start with this. I mean, in a way, this is the 15 minutes. Is that? But I will talk about particularly Chemtrails, HAARP, the book, where truthfully I was pretty much a beginner, and I stuck very close to the documents. And Clifford was available by phone to guide me through certain things. And I had read Nick Begich's 1995 book, Angels Don't Play This HAARP, HAARP. And so I knew some things, but
Elana, I'm sorry to interrupt, but if you go up to your upper right-hand corner in your screen and click that highlighted button that says Format, Yeah, click on that and it'll make your text go. Yeah, you were right there. Go back to your right, and where it says, yeah, keep going right there. Click on format.
Okay, it says apps at this point. I go in there and go format.
Would
More. Oh, wait,
Yeah,
format.
if you click on format, it should just widen your screen so people can see it a little more clearly.
Yeah, but I don't see the word format.
Oh, I'm seeing it on your screen. Uh-huh.
You are?
Yeah.
On my, up here? I'm so
Yeah,
sorry.
right there. To
Right
your
here?
left. Go one more to your left.
Yeah, I see it. This was covering it, all the pictures. Okay, got
perfect.
it.
Thank you.
Thank you for the course on how to do this computer. All right, so I spent most of my time in the book explaining weather, and I was very much concentrating on the very first geoengineering operation. And this list, by the way, has been tweaked by me, admittedly, but this is Clifford Carnicom's list that he had back in 2005 for his aerosol crimes film, which is still good, still relevant, and is on the net for free. So I spent a lot of time on the weather. And at that time, that would have been before 2014, maybe from 2011 to 2014. What was going on was what I call, well, and what the newspapers and media called extreme weather. There were a lot of experiments going on by the geoengineers. Now, I wasn't using the term geoengineering much then either. I was using the US Air Force Academy's term chemtrails, which is straight from their their chemistry manual for to-be pilots. And then, as you know, it's been turned into sort of a conspiracy word now. Very interesting how the mainstream media that's completely a mockingbird CIA-controlled media gave it a little twist, a little spin, and it ends up being a conspiracy theory, which also is a CIA term from when John Kennedy was killed and people began to inquire as to the role of the CIA in the assassination. So, it all, what goes around comes around. It all comes back. I also spent time going through Bernard Eastland's patent for HAARP, which he did several, but the 1987 one, I sort of deconstructed in one chapter in order to show some very interesting correlations with the work of Dr. Robert Becker, who was a real doctor, and he's written a couple of great books on just exactly what being a resonant being means. Is that certainly human beings are very resonant. We tend to resonate with what's around us, what's being pulsed around us. And so he points out a thing called cyclotron resonance. So I spent quite a bit of time on that in the chapter of deconstruction. The other thing that's unusual about the book, besides the extreme weather, and let me just name a few things, that would be Hurricane Sandy in New York, with the various things going on around it, Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, Fukushima in Japan. I go into all of these and indicate that HAARP, the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Project up in Kokona, Alaska, a tremendously powerful ionospheric heater, was involved in all that. So I attempt to prove that in the book. The final chapter is about Morgellons and Clifford Carnicom's work on it. Now, at that time, another term that I did not have yet and was not using was nanotechnology. I don't even know if I knew much about it. I knew I maybe ran into a few accounts of nanotechnology being in the jet fuel, JP8 up in the commercial jets. Maybe I ran into it also regarding some of the barium, strontium, aluminum, all of the different heavy metals being dumped from on high in the stratosphere. And those would have had to do with nanotechnology, all very, very tiny. A nano is 1/1,000,000th of a meter. Very, very important. Cannot stress enough that we have been under and are still under a nanotechnology revolution that, of course, our media has not informed us of or tried to prepare us for. So that's the first book, where it's really about weather, and it's also, to my knowledge, the only place that Clifford Carnicom's work is gone into in detail that is now in publication. This is a tragedy beyond belief that for 20, 25 years, this scientist who used to work for the Department of Defense, worked for Bureau of Land Management, quit those, went off on his own because he didn't quite like their philosophy, and that he has been ignored and marginalized by those very powers. And I think I've mentioned very often, but it's worth mentioning again, that when I got to know Clifford in Santa Fe, where I was also living, he pointed out that in the early days of his research into the condensation that he was collecting in northern New Mexico after the jets would fly, the HEPA filter detritus that he would scrape out and put under the microscope, that during those days he noticed on his computer that, and he had a software which availed him of this, he noticed that about, I think the list is 125 alphabet agencies from Washington, D.C. and probably Colorado Springs were all hitting his website to see what he was coming up with on his own, as they completely ignored all his appeals. And he sent many, along with experiments that he wanted replicated, to the EPA, the CDC, the Food and Drug Administration, et cetera. So this is our government. And that's when I began to wonder if this was a classified project, this geoengineering. And to my satisfaction, that was proven by the fact that this was happening to Clifford. He was ignored, and yet they were hitting his site, and that I was finding that I could not get the formula for the JP8 fuel. I tried commercial airline organizations, I tried military sites, and I was meanwhile trying to be a little bit sotto voce. I didn't know that I really wanted them to know that I was digging deep into this topic. Nope, couldn't get it classified. The fuel formula is classified. So I was pretty convinced. Then, of course, I saw that Raytheon initially owned all the patents for HARP, and along with the CIA. In fact, I would say that Raytheon and Lockheed Martin are synonyms for the CIA. So finding that the most massive, questionable intelligence agency of the United States was involved with these technologies that had to do with environment, climate change, global warming, was a little odd. And I then accepted that I was in classified territory, despite the fact that I could go on the net and find many, many patents, many papers, lots of PowerPoint presentations at conferences, military conferences, NASA conferences, NOAA conferences, et cetera. If you scatter something widely enough, sort of like the myth of Isis and Osiris, where the body of Osiris, after his brother kills him, is spread out throughout the Nile Delta. And Isis, his sister wife, then goes and looks for all these things. It's sort of similar on the internet. A lot is there in open source, but you have to know what you're looking for. And when you find it, the most important thing is You have to know how to contextualize it. And as Foster said earlier, this is the strength of my mind. I've seen it for many years. I have the kind of mind that is so wrapped and enamored of knowledge that and observation of life. I've always wanted to be a great writer since I was a little girl. You know, people would ask me, and what do you want to be when you grow up? And I would say, I'm going to be a teacher and a writer. I'm one of those people that knew from the very beginning. So for me, I can collect a lot of data, let it sort of percolate, let it sit, see a few things that make me think of something else, write that down in my notes, and then sort of wait for it to coalesce into a few thoughts. And that seems to be how it works, is for thinking anyway. And I don't know if people know this, but I'm a student of Rudolf Steiner. I learned a lot about thinking from Rudolf Steiner. Thinking is a very special kind of spiritual activity, according to him. And it really sort of arises. And only later, when I was reading some of the brain research that the military is pursuing, did I realize, oh, of course, thinking is not produced by the brain. They didn't think so either. It is a quantum activity. It is from quantum dimensions. And so to me, to lay out these books so that people could use a beginner's would be the Chemtrails Harp. And then to go to the second book, because the second book was born out of the first, to take what I had learned about weather engineering and chemical and electromagnetic engineering that is now taking place and has for almost 3 decades in our atmosphere. I was able to then go one by one through Clifford's list of operations and see what has been done with them over the years. Each book goes a little deeper into the rabbit hole or into the sky, you might have to say, in order to see how once the atmosphere was ionized, and this is what I go into in the very first book of the role that HAARP played. And by the time it was published, HAARP had shut down for a time. And the Air Force had admitted that HAARP was completely successful in its experimentation to control the ionosphere. Control over the ionosphere leads to all 3 books, because without that control, you cannot keep the chemical and electromagnetic and nanotech composition of the atmosphere so that you can have plasma clouds, which is what we have now. These are not moisture clouds, I assure you. Especially the cirrus cloud cover is completely made of plasma, which is the 4th state of matter. And you can see how a whole raft of experiments were sort of loosed after HAARP was successful. And the geoengineering then needed a cover story because a lot of experimentation was going to be done over the next decades. And I have a list right here of all of the experimentation that is still going on from the stratosphere down. And really, if we continue to just think of the weather engineering, which is large enough, I understand that. Everybody talks about the weather. Everybody wonders about the weather. Many generals in many wars, like what's going on over in Ukraine, I'm sure they have the weather on their minds. The fact that control over the ionosphere has given full power over weather engineering around the globe is very hard for people to accept from me. And yet I do maintain that it's one atmosphere. All the weather is now controlled. Does that mean that there is no natural weather ever? Well, if there is natural weather, which arises usually in the South Pacific, then it is going to be allowed to be natural. But my guess is nothing is allowed anymore. It is all tweaked and used for experimentation. So I think I went a little outside your boundaries.
No, that's
Foster.
fine. So let me just highlight you mentioned the second book. So why don't you pause your share for a moment and let me tell people what this second book is. So this is the Under an Ionized Sky, from Chemtrails to Space Fence Lockdown. So we're going to get into that in just a moment. But particularly while people on the open platforms are still here, some people who aren't familiar with this topic may be going, oh, wow, there's a couple of real loonies on the internet talking about as if humans were controlling the weather or the atmosphere or something like that. So let me give you some frame of reference here, because they've been doing this. Clifford Carnicom has demonstrated it literally since the late 90s. So over probably 25 years, they've been doing it. So now that they've not only had to develop this cover story that Elana, it's for global warming but they've been doing it so long that they're now getting busted on it. So they need to come up with the authorization to keep doing it as if they hadn't been doing it all along. So let me share my screen again with you for just a second. And I'll show you a chilling video of John Brennan, who is the disgraced former CIA director who's been caught lying multiple times to Congress about Russiagate and a bunch of other things. But in this particular one, he's talking to the Council on Foreign Relations about his excitement about the potential of geoengineering. And you can see in this film, check, the warmth of his eye contact with the audience. You can get a sense what a sociopath looks like when he's actually delivering the lies. Look at this.
Another example is the array of technologies, often referred to collectively as geoengineering, that potentially could help reverse the warming effects of global climate change. One that has gained my personal attention is stratospheric aerosol injection, or SAI, a method of seeding the stratosphere with particles that can help reflect the sun's heat in much the same way that volcanic eruptions do. An SAI program could limit global temperature increases, reducing some risks associated with higher temperatures and providing the world economy additional time to transition from fossil fuels. This process is also relatively inexpensive. The National Research Council estimates that a fully deployed SAI program would cost about $10 billion yearly. As promising as it may be, moving forward on SAI would also raise a number of challenges for our government and for the international community. On the technical side, greenhouse gas emission reductions would still have to accompany SAI to address other climate change effects, such as ocean acidification, because SAI alone would not remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. On the geopolitical side, the technology's potential to alter weather patterns and benefit certain regions of the world at the expense of other regions could trigger sharp opposition by some nations. Others might seize on SAI's benefits and back away from their commitment to carbon dioxide reductions. And as with other breakthrough technologies, global norms and standards are lacking to guide the deployment and implementation of SAI and other geoengineering initiatives. Now, I could go on and on and on and on about the things that fascinate me, but rather than talk about them, I thought I'd stop here.
Okay, and let me show you one more here, because in their effort to get permission to do this,
when you look at
they've
this,
been trying to
what do you see?
To
me, this is one of the most beautiful, fascinating, and frustrating things I've ever seen. That's because I'm a mathematician.
There's a Harvard scientist named David Keith, who's been one of the main geoengineers all along. And so he got a mainstream appearance on late night, with Stephen Colbert, so he could get a chance to sell this. And this has become a classic.
You could actually spray sulfuric acid in the stratosphere, 20 kilometers over our head.
And one more time.
You could actually spray sulfuric acid in the stratosphere 20 kilometers over our head and use that to stop the planet warming up in a kind of ugly tech fix.
You can spray something into the atmosphere to change.
Spray pollution into the atmosphere to stop it warming.
How do you do this?
You'd start with a fleet of modified business jets and say 20,000 tons of sulfuric acid into the stratosphere every year. And each year you have to put a little more. And this doesn't, in the long run, mean that you can forget about cutting emissions. We will need to rein in emissions.
We'll get to it eventually. But in the meantime, we're shrouding the earth in sulfuric acid.
So people are terrified about talking about this because they're scared that it will prevent us cutting emissions.
Right, and also that it's sulfuric acid.
We put 50 million tons of sulfuric acid in the air now as pollution, and it kills 1 million people a year worldwide.
Okay, but it'll be better if we put more in.
We're talking about 1% of that.
1% more, we're just killing 10,000 more people.
You can do math.
What happens to the sulfuric acid after it's sprayed? Does it just stay up there?
No, it rains down, but it's a tiny addition to what we're already doing.
Is there any possible way this could come back to bite us in the end?
It actually turns out to be an old idea. This was known since President Johnson.
You ever look at those planes up there? They have contrails behind them. Maybe all those planes with the contrails, maybe they're actually spraying chemicals into the atmosphere right now, and Uncle Sam isn't telling us.
Seems extremely unlikely.
That the United States is not telling something to its citizens? That seems extremely likely to me. Read the newspaper. I think they might have your idea already.
Okay.
That's terrific.
So that gives you a little bit of a sense of how they're actually trying to bring this out into the mainstream now. We're going to dive into the next of these topics. But before we do, we've run into the time where we need to close down the public platforms now and invite anybody who's watching on those free platforms to come to the Freedom Portal, where you can sign up very quickly for a free membership trial and then come right back into this conversation, because we're going to be diving into the EMF and the ionization. We're going to be going into transhumanism, and then we're going to be going into who's doing this and why are they doing this, and how can we actually stop this and turn it around. So obviously it's a critical conversation. And if you're not already a member of the Freedom Portal, we would love to have you get into these deep conversations with us and to continue with this one. So Leandro, if you could come back on and just let people know the steps to take to come over to that if they're interested, then we'll dive back in.
Absolutely. I'll go ahead and share my screen so I can walk you guys through this process. All right, so basically you're just going to go over to thriveon.com, and we'll be dropping links in the chat as well, so you can go straight there. And basically you're going to click to start your free 7-day trial. And once you get to this page, you'll have the ability to select between the different account levels, whether you want to be an Explorer or an Angel, and whether you want to be monthly or annual. And once you make that decision, you can go ahead and click Start My Trial. Okay, then it's going to take you to a thank you page, and you can go ahead and click to return to the Freedom Portal catalog. And then once you get there, you're going to click on the sign in to continue link on that big thumbnail right there. Don't click get access now, because you've already signed up and logged in with your credentials. So you're going to go ahead and sign in there, enter the credentials you just set up. And then once you get back to the event page, you can click attend next to today's event. Then it'll take you to the next page, and you can click join webinar down there at the bottom. And that'll bring you into the Zoom with us, so you can participate in the live chat with our core Freedom Portal community and continue this enlightening and exciting conversation.
All right. Thanks a lot, Leandro.
Absolutely.
We hope that you will join us, and let's keep going now. Where would you want to go next? We've touched on the ionization, and I want to get into the third book also on the the transhumanism, but where it makes sense for you, Elana, to go next in this story?
Well, let's go back to my magic list,
Okay.
which really helps to visualize that the geoengineering that David Keith is telling us about that might have to happen sometime. And by the way, after President Trump was elected the first time, in 2017, David Keith came trotting back out and seemed to me to be normalizing the weather engineering, the geoengineering. And how I could tell was he was saying that, gee whiz, folks, we're going to have to do some of this sulfur that I've been talking about, and we're going to start it like right away. So I assume that SAI and the other acronym type things they use for covering over what they're really dumping from these jets, it really has been normalized. And I do see signs of normalization of geoengineering. Not that that means that it's in the news very much. It's not. It's avoided assiduously, and I'm constantly marginalized, and we have trouble keeping my videos up, and just very soft control going on, generally speaking, around me. So let me just kind of go through these. Notice that there's a real difference between the first three. Now, the planetary geophysical, I have not mentioned the engineering, and that has to do with changing the planet. And of course, the atmosphere now is absolutely changed. Clifford Carnicom told me that years ago, that the atmosphere was completely different from what we used to have. In fact, he did a digital spectrum analyzer, oscilloscope, on a lot of on the atmosphere, and came up with the fact that that frequencies had been changed to a pulsing frequency. That it's like the Earth has a wonderful frequency, as we all know, called the Schumann resonance, and that's basically 7.83, or at least historically it has been. That is now changing. In fact, it's being changed by the geoengineers. They're experimenting with a lot of different frequencies. And Clifford, back in, this was 2003, wrote a paper called Extra Low Frequency Radiation is Confirmed. And in that, he then proves that this pulsation, the pulsation, interestingly enough, is sort of in 6-second durations. So that right away makes me think of 60 hertz. 6 times 10 is 60 hertz. And in gigahertz, that's 60 gigahertz, which is one of the biggest and most important 5G frequencies that is being pulsed in the atmosphere. And we can talk about that in a while. So right away, we're now in the planetary geophysical. Another way they're using it is in starting fires and making sure that they're choosing only certain things to burn, and then not another, like, let's burn this metal car, but not this one. Let's get a fire going in the middle of this tree, but we're not going to touch that tree. Let's burn this home of a Hollywood star to the ground, but not that Hollywood star's home. I mean, we've seen that in the California fires. There seems to be a choice element going on. So geophysical engineering is really about fire and explosives, in my opinion. And it has to do with changing the planet. It has to do with real estate deals. There are many things. So each of these has many, many subcategories that they are discovering, that they had discovered and have wanted to test, etc. So directed energy weapons is another one. And this one's a bit hard because we all know, well, at least some of us know the term directed energy weapons. could be high-powered microwave weapons, could be extra low frequency weapons. We know it's weapons if the word weapons is after it, you see, because we don't really understand the electromagnetic spectrum very well. When you look at the electromagnetic spectrum, let me see if I can find one here. I have a really good one. When you look at it, you realize, wow, I just don't see really very much going on. Not that one. Let's see. Sorry to whip you through my whole slideshow here. It's pretty good. Oh, there's Clifford. Another picture of Clifford. And let's get down here. There we go. Okay, just to show you that that's the visible range there where the rainbow is. That's what we can see, we human beings that think so much of ourselves. But we can't see out into the ultraviolet, we can't see the gamma rays, nor can we see the infrared, the microwaves, and the radio waves at the other end of the spectrum. But we have instruments now that are dependent upon these frequencies. We have X-ray machines, for example. We have all these that you're seeing: radio, smart meters, Wi-Fi, microwave. And so we all have to sort of learn the nomenclature of electromagnetics. And I do think it's essential. I think that the people who say that they haven't liked science since high school, I think that needs to be reconsidered, at least to learn somewhat of what we are facing in the technology around us. I really highly, highly recommend that. And so directed energy weapons isn't just the big military stuff that's up in space, missiles and particle beams and that sort of thing. No, it's actually, take for example your iPhone. Now, I don't own an iPhone because I don't want to own, I want to own as few military dual use weapons as possible. I do own a computer, and that is a military dual use weapon. You see how I'm thinking. I'm recategorizing according to our risk factor for our human biology. That's why I'm calling them this, because they can now be combined in such ways in your home, in your place of work, in your car with how many computers in it. They can be combined in such a way that you can actually be targeted with the beams from these devices. Now, you may know some targeted individuals. Some targeted individuals may be listening to this broadcast, but whether or not you do, targeting is very real. And the ability to control the brain, to control the body, to control different systems in the body, all of this has been known to the CIA for, at least 5 or 6 decades. So let's think of directed energy weapons a little more broadly than we are led to believe, that they are just military and we don't have to think about military. That's for the military to think of. No, it's all different now because most of the technologies we own, for example, Alexa, for example, even the 60 hertz in the walls for our electricity, most of it is what is called dual use, which basically means it can be used for military operations as well as civilian. So let's start redefining some of these terms. All right, surveillance. We know about surveillance. We tried to stop it years ago. I remember I had some good laughs over that, as if you could actually stop surveillance, not just satellite surveillance, but surveillance from these very technologies that I've been mentioning: the television set, the computer, the iPhone, the whatever. So that's what that is. Neural manipulation means basically mind control. And that can happen from space, that can happen on the Earth, that can happen by triangulating. with various devices. So that's right in the middle. So we went through the first three. Those were pretty physical, what I would call physical. Then we hit the directed energy weapons that I have now asked you to redefine. Now we're heading into three other areas that, in my mind anyway, sort of go together. They have to do with electromagnetics, they have to do with nanotechnology, and they have to do with chemicals to a degree. So then next
Let me pause you there for just a moment, because I'd like to just jump back and talk about this a little bit before we get into that next section.
Right.
So I'm just trying to picture somebody in the audience who might be seeing this for the first time. And so we've already talked about that there are those who we are claiming who are manipulating the entire atmosphere. And they're doing it with the weather, they're doing it with chemicals, metals, EMF radiation, lasers, nanoparticles. Let me just, while we kind of summarize that, let me ask for your view on why are they doing this?
Okay, so yeah, and thank you for stopping me steamrolling, Foster. I really appreciate that. The thing I wanted to say before I answer that question is all of the ones we have just talked about, up to directed energy weapons and going into the surveillance neuromanipulation, all of that is in the second book. I cover all of it, but I hang heavy on the space fence, which basically means what we used to call the smart grid. We knew that there was a smart grid being created. We just didn't know that it went all the way up into space, and that it actually sandwiches us in between. And so we can return to that in a moment. That really is the reason behind why all of this is being done. It goes back to a Soviet astronomer named Nikolai Kardashev, and the secret space program that Catherine Austin Fitts, the investment analyst, talks about or was talking about. The secret space program actually goes back before John Kennedy's assassination, and perhaps all the way to, I would say, Werner von Braun, who was an SS officer that we put in charge of most of our space program in the United States. So the secret space program is attempting, in my opinion, is attempting to fulfill Nikolai Kardashev's threefold plan for a true great civilization. That one, it will have full spectrum dominance. That's the name of a military doctrine, by the way. It will have full spectrum dominance over its planet. That civilization will then have full spectrum dominance over its star. That would be our sun. And it will then, thirdly, have full spectrum dominance over our planetary sphere, where we are with all of our planets, the solar system, and over the galaxy would be the final. So though this probably sounds like a bad case of hubris to you, this is actually taken very seriously by various NASA higher ups, NASA brotherhoods, like the Saturnalian Brotherhood. These are the secret societies that John Kennedy attempted to warn us of, that so far we have not paid that much attention to, sadly. And all of this is something they very much want and have wanted for, well, let's say at least 100 years, but maybe much longer. So the people involved in it would be the bankers. They would be backing this, the central bankers who are very wealthy, the people who are making money from controlling money, high finance, yes, they would be involved in this financially, and I would assume their ideas as well. So the global elite, to cut to the chase, are very invested in the idea of full spectrum dominance, not just over planet Earth, but over the solar system itself, including the sun. And so that's who I see as being behind it. And it seems to me that we've gotten a very good look at some of these people, though it's not in the geoengineering context. Perhaps they're not talking about the fact that they want to be able to control the universe, but they are very much involved in controlling planet Earth. And I think that has become quite obvious to us now in the last 2.5 years. Would you agree, Foster?
Yeah. Why don't you stop sharing for a minute? Let's just talk about this for a minute. It's such an amazing moment of realization. And I actually, believe it or not, I had never heard the part that you just said about I'm very familiar with full spectrum dominance, but I didn't realize that they applied it outside the solar system. I mean, the level it's so far beyond hubris that, like, okay, we're going to control the galaxy. Let's see. We've got potentially 1 billion at least other solar systems, and we're going to control them. I mean, this is a level of insanity that's hard for most people to imagine, which leads to my next question of, okay, if this is their plan, why are they so obsessed with this? What is the mechanism inside a human being that would have them not only have that thought themselves, but then dedicate their lives, their money, their organizations and everything? Why are they doing this, in your opinion?
So I return to the influence that Rudolf Steiner has had on me. I want to be very transparent about this. I always say I like my gurus dead. It's not a very nice thing to say, but I have only, as people know, Steiner died early at 64 from arsenic poisoning in 1925. And he is called by occultists the lone Christian initiate of the 20th century, just to let you know. So I have learned a great deal from studying Steiner. I was a Waldorf teacher for many years. It's a great education for children, or it has been. I don't know about it now. And he's the one that he did a series of lectures in 1917 that had a huge influence on me. Now, 1917 was the third year of the European War, the war to end all wars, right? World War I. It was a chemical war completely controlled by Big Pharma, who existed back then. That would have been mainly IG Farben. That destroyed an entire generation of European youths. All right, a terrible, terrible chemical warfare. And by 1917, Rudolf Steiner changed, and he was not talking like he had before. Before, it had been sort of letting people know certain inner truths behind some of the historical events, but now he came out with both guns blazing, I would say. He, in 2 books called The Karma of Untruthfulness, he gives a series of lectures about how World War I really began. And he exposes completely, which, by the way, is not very accepted by occultists, that an occultist himself would come out and tell the whole story. But he did. He came out and he told about the secret societies. He told about the role of Great Britain, which is what England was called then, Great Britain, and the role it played in World War I, the secret societies in Great Britain, including the Freemasons. He just went on and on and on and just hammered away at this history that he had been sitting on his entire life, probably. So I read those and was so shocked that I had missed this story of World War I. I had concentrated on World War II. So I now realized, yes, my task is to expose the evil of these secret societies that lie behind every political act that there is, everything. And I'm serious. It looks out here like, it's kind of like you're you're watching TV on a screen and you just see the good stuff, but really there's a studio behind that and there's all sorts of activity going on as they're filming, and there's all sorts of politics involved in the studio, and you don't see that unless you have a source or you start a big research campaign. So that's how I am. I have gone deeply into many, many issues that have destroyed this country and what the original hope for this nation was.
Could you say the name of those lectures again?
Yeah, the karma of untruthfulness.
Okay.
And I think we can all relate to untruthfulness now because we are now involved in endless lies from the mainstream media. So with that in mind, when you look at this desire to control everything, and you realize that, yes, these people want to be not as gods, they want to be gods. I mean, I heard Mr. Harari say it in a film clip I watched.
Yeah.
Mr. Harari, the number one advisor of Klaus Schwab and that entire crew, he did say that free will is over, and that people will now be controlled from, wait for it, under the skin. Yes, right. He did say it. And it seems that he's just making it very clear that life will be better when you are programmed to do what you should do according to your betters who know better for you, and that's where we are.
So what is it, do you think, I mean, this may not be your field, but I can't help but ask, if their end game is absolute control of everything, everyone, the entire universe, that's an exhausting task, to say the least. What is it in the human makeup of some people that you think becomes obsessed with that? Why that?
Well, in my mind, from all I've read, and I've done a lot of conspiracy book reading too, many years of studying this. And, I don't really care what somebody is called, the name they're called. What I look for is content that might correlate with some content I've picked up somewhere else. I'm not really into the personality game. And I learned a lot about how they want this in order to control the future, be as gods, and the primary movers and shakers of this are what are the conspiracy theorists call dynastic bloodlines.
Uh-huh.
And even though you've heard that and gone ha ha ha, maybe now with the inoculation drama going on now, and finding that there are all sorts of things inside these serums that really shouldn't be there if it's just a serum for a disease, to prevent a disease. We now know that, at least we should know, that the big pharma in general is to me, Foster, a cartel. And that came from reading the history of several histories of World War II, and discovering also what lay behind the Marc Dutroux affair in Belgium back in the 90s, when you start reading the families who owned the castles at which children were being satanically sacrificed. And, I certainly do not laugh at that term. Why would I? It's a full-blown religion of the will. And realizing, oh, yeah, they're all big pharma families. and going, wow, okay, so chemtrails, big pharma.